A working theory for working groups. Opinion: the government has been criticized for being addicted to forming working groups to meet its policy needs. Even Radio New Zealand's Checkpoint, hosted by John Campbell, has tweaked the government for it. Introducing a story on the matter, Campbell pointed out the government has announced plans for a review, a working group, an advisory group, or an investigation once every 4 days, on average, since assuming power. Political scientist Bryce Edwards has criticized this as a timid government kicking for touch on difficult issues. At first, I agreed with Edwards. What's with all of these outside panels? Isn't it the job of the government to govern? Haven't these guys spent the past 9 years telling us how great they would be at running things? Why do they need all this extra help? Read more. Gloom ahead of budget. Will Davidson grow Green's vote? PM. Buttock 11 Expressway safe. But then some government defenders pointed out to me that it's just smart practice. Having a working group, you see, enables the government to make informed decisions. Ministers are too busy ministering to wrap their heads around every issue. A degree of outsourcing makes sense. So, now I think, if anything, we should go further. The working group concept should be expanded and made a permanent part of how we run the country. We could even embed working groups within our constitutional framework. But if we do that, we should do it the right way. So, in the remainder of this column, I'll set out my proposal for what those arrangements might look like. First, there should be a standing working group to which all matters of law and policy can be referred. Presently, working groups are formed on an ad hoc basis. We should be more systematic. One of the problems with working groups is that, in the past, governments have convened them and then ignored their recommendations. What's the point of spending taxpayer funds for findings you just cast aside? It's crazy. To prevent this happening, I suggest that the working group be given real teeth. In the first place, the government shouldn't be allowed to pass new laws without the working group's consent. In the second place, if a majority of the working group recommends something, it should, with 1 or 2 exceptions, become enforceable law. Of course, if we're going to do policy this way, we need to ensure the working group does not become a mere creature of the government. We must see that a number of perspectives can be heard within the group. But this should also be balanced by the fact the government has a mandate, and so its agenda should prevail in the working group's deliberations. So, membership of the working group should generally be allocated according to each political party's share of the vote in the most recent general election. If a party wins 40% of the vote, it should be entitled to 40% of the places on the working group. Pretty simple. Of course, there is a need to keep the crazies out. We should limit participation to those parties whose vote percentage crosses a certain threshold. 5% seems about right. The delegates will need to have time to be able to study the issues. We want them to have their full attention on their work. This means we will need to pay them a professional salary commensurate with the importance of their work. A base salary of $160,000 or so should do it. I know it's not as much as some earn, but, for most New Zealanders, it's a high income. It's certainly enough that, if you were paid it, you would be expected to do your job properly and take responsibility for being on top of issues. The types of questions faced by a government can be broad. This means we will need to ensure the working group has enough depth to get through the work. I would think at least 100 members. Even the many may be 20% too low. The working group should also be divided into subcommittees to look at particular subject areas. I suggest we need 11 or so subcommittees. The topics to be covered would span all areas of government concern, from finance and economic matters to science and culture. These subcommittees would, in the usual course of events, be expected to seek public submissions. That would ensure that public-spirited subject matter experts can give their views too. At the end of this process, the subcommittee would report to the full working group. If we had such a body, appropriately remunerated and resourced, we could ensure all government decisions were informed ones. Of course, such an august working group needs a suitably impressive name. I suggest Plenipotentiary Advisory Review looking into all matters Executive National Task Force. We might need to shorten it for everyday use. Maybe an acronym. comments have been closed.